So today what I'm going to present to you is I'll be talking a little bit about Nexus, which is our design system here at OLX. I'm a front-end developer. I work at OLX for 2 years now in the motors vertical, which is focused on car and car parts classifieds. And we are present in many countries and in Romania, Poland, and Portugal. And sorry, I see a request to admit entrance. I don't know if Daniel,
Just
if
admit
you.
it, and I'm gonna get back to. I reclaimed the host. I'm gonna let them in. Sorry.
All right, no, that's okay. That's okay. And okay, and yeah, you guys can find me anywhere at Francine. And before starting the slides, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. For some of us, we are finishing the day if you are in Romania. For others, like the ones that are here in Lisbon, it's still 4:30 in the afternoon. So thank you for taking your coffee break here with us today and watching this presentation. And I want to start with a small story. So, because about 1 year ago, it was January last year, we were hosting a meetup in our offices. And you remember this before times when we used to gather in closed spaces and sit right next to each other, those glorious times. And here we had this meetup, and I had the opportunity to be talking about the motors design system that we had developed for the motors vertical. And at the end of the talk, someone asked me, so is this for motors only, or is this a shared design system between other products in the company? And my answer at the time was no, not yet. But today I can happily say that we are sharing a design system with other products at OLX. And in this path, we learned a lot of things. And today I'm here to share that with you. So today what I'll be presenting some main concepts of what is a design system. I will also be presenting why is a design system relevant to us and how we've built one, the tools that we use, the experience that we gather in building this shared design system within the company. And hopefully you can take some insights on how and maybe even start working on your own. So let's go. So first things first, what is a design system? So a design systems are a collection of rules, constraints, and principles implemented in design and code. It's much more than just a style guide. It's a set of guidelines of what to use, where to use, when, and how to use it. It's a way to know what should or shouldn't be done to keep consistency on all platforms and products. It should contain everything from colors, typography, spacing, everything, you name it. It provides consistent, robust design patterns that can benefit many teams. And ultimately, a design system is a product that is serving other products and it should be treated as such. And why is it important? A design system is important because it helps us to have a coherent experience across all locations and platforms. Here in Motors, we focus on cars and car parts classifieds, like I mentioned before, and we are present in Poland with Automoto, Romania with Autovitro, and in Portugal with Stand Virtual. And we have millions of people visiting our platforms every month and millions of ads available. And we have many people working these platforms at the same time, and we want to keep consistency on what we do. A design system will help us determine the way that basic elements talk to each other and help us create more complex layouts on top of that. And the design system also help us make the experience consistent. But it's funny because so this presentation now is an adaptation of that one that I presented last year. And I use this slide to help show consistency between products. But actually, really, if we look closely, we start seeing some inconsistencies because we are not using a design system still at this point. We can see that, for example, the primary link color in one brand is different than the other. The placeholders is a subtle gray in one place, and it's black like regular text in others. So there's a lot of small inconsistencies. The spacing is different in the websites. So this is an example of small things that can happen and some small adjustments that can happen in your product, and then that is not replicated in other places. But now I'm glad to show you that since then, this page has been redesigned and implemented using the Motors design system. And this is a, a super better experience. The visual language is now the same, the visual cues are the same. You look at it and you know it's the same brand behind it. A design system will also help you focus on the real problems. Both designers and developers will know the rules and guidelines of the design system. So instead of taking time thinking, oh, what is the button for this call to action? What font size should I use? The right button and the right typography will be already specified in the design system. A design system also creates a common language. So designers and developers can more easily discuss ideas and projects among themselves. We are all on the same page and gaps in communication are greatly reduced because of this. And then now for the developers here, I have a question for you. Do you have a folder that looks like this? It's a folder with shared visual elements in your project, but then you are going to develop something and you look at the list and it's like, what is uninformative? Why do we have a button and then an arrow button? How are they different? When do I use those? How do they even look like? So enters the design system. And this is another great benefit. Although a design system is not just about the visual elements, almost always you end up developing a visual styles and components library that's going to be documented and released as reusable codes for developers and symbols ready for use for the designers. And this will lead you to a cleaner code base. And okay, but how do we really do it? So before I enter in the how details, I have a little bit of story time for you. So our platform is built on a framework, an internal framework called Atlas. And although Atlas has bravely served its purpose through many years, we are now in the process of migrating parts of the system to more appropriate technologies. And one of these steps is decoupling the front end from it and migrating to React. And we wanted all of those things that I mentioned before. We wanted a more coherent experience when we are doing that. We wanted to also be able to focus on the real problems. We wanted to be able to communicate between designers and developers better. And we wanted to have a cleaner code base with reusable components that were easy to use. So we went on our merry way and we created Ignition, a design system for the motors vertical. And after a few months of collective hard work of the designers and front-end developers, we started using it in our products. It was not perfect. We still had a long way to go, but it was our baby and we are very proud of it. But this presentation is not called Ignition Design System. It's also not called Motors Design System anymore. So you can guess that things have changed since then. So one day there was this message in our design system channel, and ultimately it said, the design team sees an opportunity to connect the new design system for Alex rebranded and the Motors design system. So you see that while we were creating our own design system, Alex was doing some renovations, some rebranding on their websites. And an Alex design system was born out of this. And the designers saw the opportunity to join forces and connect the work that we've done so far with the design system created for the design for Alex. And with this, we would strengthen even more the coherent experience aspect of the design system. We are not only talking right now about shared experience inside a single product anymore, but across multiple products and brandings inside the company. So this made a lot of sense to us. And another thing that happened is that the designers at Alex had already created their own design system library with visual components. So we had a choice to make between adapting our existing design system to match the new guidelines or adopt their design systems and help adjust it to be shared between multiple products. And it was a little bit of a tough choice, but in the end, it made more sense to be using the shared design system, the shared library, and as it was a little bit more mature than ours, and it was closer to the final idea that we wanted for the design system. And thus was born the unified design system. But that's a mouthful, am I right? So we started some polls for defining the name of the new design system. And Blend was a close contestant, but will it blend? And no, we didn't want that, the joke as well. So we changed the name and we went with the other winner, the real winner, which was Nexus. And Nexus means connection, means a connection between things or a connected series or group. So this was a perfect name to symbolize the connection between our products. And now, really, how did we do it? So now that I gave you a little bit of backstory on our history so far, so here are the things that we learned after working on 2 different design systems. So the first thing that we need to do when working and starting a new design system, I believe, is defining the methodology and a common language for the design system, because the design system won't create itself. And so I recommend studying and discussing with designers and developers what is the best language that will work for you. The first instinct of many people is to adopt Atomic Design by Brad Frost. But the thing is that it's really hard to apply it to web development. There is a really good talk from Cristiano Rastelli of Badum, where he expressed this. Atoms and molecules can even make sense on web development. But when you get to templates and pages, how do you define a template? And pages are not that static anymore. You have a page, you click on something, something else will load on the page. Is it still the same page? Is it a new page? No, it's a living thing. And I agree with him. And actually, even to me, even atoms and molecules are a little bit hard to define because, for example, if you have a button, is a button an atom? Is a checkbox an atom? But then is the label text in the checkbox an atom too? So are we talking about a molecule? You can start to get real philosophical real fast with this. So what I recommend is it's keep it simple. All things are tokens and components. After working these 2 different design systems following this methodology, I can say that the communication is way simpler this way between engineers, designers, and even product people. It's simple and efficient. It's straight to the point. And of course, keep in mind atomic design and the composition that it teaches. But in the end, we are really dealing only with tokens and components. And some components are simpler, some are more complex, but in the end, it's just components. And we are going to discuss components in more details in a bit. But first, I want to talk with tokens. Um, I want to talk about tokens because it will be the foundation of your design system. And as someone who had to work on redoing all the tokens on the new design system, and as someone who kind of became the token police herself, I can be very passionate about this topic. So let's dive in. Uh, Tokens help us solving the problems of dealing with the many options that a design system can offer. So a design system will always have many different values for the many different properties that we have. We have many colors, spaces, sizes, typography, you name it. So you can solve some of these problems with variables and variables names. So for example, for colors, we can have blue one, we can have blue two, and etc. But the variables are only taking out the mystery out of obscure values, but they don't bridge the gap between naming and usage. So they answer what options do I have, but they leave out what choices do I make, unclear. So, but a design system strength comes from knowing how to apply options to the right context. So instead of thinking if gray 3 or gray 4 is the right tone for a border, if we have tokens, if we have tokens in place, you can now use the token border medium primary, for example, and you don't have to worry about the final value anymore because you're thinking about the meaning and the decision that is already taken. So in the end, tokens are decisions that are propagating through a design system and they are adding meaning to these obscure values. And now we have decisions that we can use with confidence and propagate to our products. And to create tokens that will have to come from you and what is best for you to define. You can start with colors and typography, which makes more sense at the beginning, but soon you see what else could also benefit from having a token. And here, looking a little bit at a code finally. So here we have the current tokens that we are using. In simple terms, we are using it as a theme inside the project, and the tokens are the variables names. Having tokens well defined, or at least having a clear structure that will allow you to expand in the future, can help a lot in the long run. And this is especially important when your design system will be used by multiple products like ours. So Alexa Motors can have very different branding. So even then, we using the shared design system won't block them on that. So the names that so components won't have names like blue 5, which is the primary color for motors, and but meanwhile Alex, the primary color is charcoal. So we are not using names anymore, we are using tokens. So now we have the primary color or background global primary, for example. So we abstract the values into their meanings, and then later each brand can just provide the values that makes more sense to them. And since we're using them based on the meanings on the components, it will automatically translate to the right places. And in the code, we can consume these tokens. For example, if you're using React like us with a theme provider, here we have a snippet for the providers for motors and OLX theme. But we can also expose the theme object, so you can import the theme directly and consume it as you wish. In our case, we are consuming it and using in CSS and JS styles. And okay, now that we are all token experts, we can start talking about components. So related with components, we have worked with two different approaches. So on Ignition, the motors only design system, we started using React and Sass. And that decision was made because we wanted to have pure HTML components that could also be used on legacy code. And then we could use the same CSS for React components. And one strategy that we adopted was that one component would hold all the variants of that single component. So for example, a button has many variations and it was all implemented in the same component, which made it real simple to use. The consumer would only have to load one button, and then we can import it and just pass the prop of the type that you want, and voila, we have a primary button. But because we had on one single component holding all of the variants that you can have, it can that end up leading with you shipping a lot of code to your clients that you don't really need. Because even if you only needed one variation of this button, you are still shipping to your client the code for dealing with all the other variations inside their code. So you're increasing your bundling even if you like it or not. Now, Nexus, the shared design system, was built differently, and I quite prefer this approach a lot more. So we have something similar to what Airbnb did in their design system, if you are familiar with it, or if not, you can check it out. There is a very good talk from them. So here we have a base component, for example, a base button. And this base component will hold all of the minimum common stylings and the minimum information for what a button requires. And then its only purpose is to be extended by other buttons and create each variation. So now if we wanted to only use the primary button, we would only be importing that variation, and we can have as many other types of buttons that we need, and the final client wouldn't even know about it. At least their bundle size definitely won't know about it. This means that we are going to have a lot more files, since you're not only, but now you're only getting the code relevant to the button that you're using. And translating this to code, Nexus uses TypeScript, React, Motion, and styled system. And here we have some snippets of the base button component, and it's setting the base styles and settings for a common button in general. So like it's doing things like text positioning, typography, how to deal with icons, basic stuff. And then if I want to implement, for example, a secondary button, it extends the stylings for the button base and then implements its own styles on top of it. So now when consuming, we are going to import just that button that we need and just that code that we need and nothing else. You won't be shipping nothing else to the clients, and all those other dozens of buttons variations will be left behind. And how do we develop these beauties in general? So here are more or less the steps of our component development. We currently have a governance team and that helps keeping the house in order. Some are working on it half of their time. So for example, we have a product manager and a designer that are dedicating a lot of their time to the library. And although they're not there full time, it surely feels like they are because they're super proactive and responsive. And we finally have a full-time front-end engineer that is going to start soon working dedicated in the design system. That is here in the call. Hi, Dimas.
Hi.
um, but also we have some volunteers like me and other front-end engineers from Lex and Motors that take some time that they have available to participate in the discussions, defining processes, and doing some tasks on demand. So the first step is communication, and is communicating with the design system team channel in general. So we have this Slack channel, and every time someone, a designer or a developer, sees the necessity of having a new component or reporting a bug or proposing a new change, they can go to the Slack channel. We have a format of a message where they can state what they need, if it's a new thing, update or bug, what is the impact, why is it necessary, if it's urgent or not. And then we discuss on Slack, and it's an open channel, and everyone interested should chime in. But also, ultimately, the governance team will participate in the discussion and help with any clarifications needed. And we are committed to, at least at the end of the day, uh, to close the discussion, to either say, okay, this is a thing that is going to move forward, or no, we actually don't think this is something necessary. And we put this hard deadline because if we are not agile and respond to people quickly, people will start seeing this as a blocker and won't bother to collaborate with the design system. So we try to make it as agile as we can. And then next, then the design, once this new change is approved, the designer then creates the component in the designer's UI toolkit and make it available to engineers using Zeppelin. And it's ideally also at this stage that they will be documenting the component at zero height, but this might also happen in parallel during the component implementation, depending on time. Zero height is a documentation platform, which is very friendly. So you don't need to know code to use it. And it's very powerful because it can easily integrate with tools like Zeppelin and developer tools like Storybook. So we have zero height page, and it is supposed to be our source of truth regarding documentation of the design system. So everything related to the design system, from principles to foundations and component specifications, you can find it there. And then we start implementing it. Finally, the fun part. So like I mentioned, our current design system is using React and TypeScript, and we have styled systems and emotion for styling. And here I'm going to share some of the tools that we use for development that help us a lot. So first thing and foremost is Storybook. Storybook is amazing for documenting everything. And seriously, if you're not using Storybook yet, you're missing out. Even if you don't have a library, a real library of components, you can have Storybook in your own in your product project and start using it to help you document the components that you have, because it will, with Storybook we can create stories which are examples of different usages of the components. We can display the API of the components, and it also serves as a playground for developers and other people and others to play around with the components. And for example, we have a switcher between the OLX and the motor theme, so we can see how the components behave in these different scenarios. We also use commits for our commit messages. So these help us standardize our commit messages if it's a new feature, if it's a breaking change, etc. And this will create a structured commit message, and this will come in handy after when we are going to publish the library. And to ensure that the commit messages are actually in the right format and have the right information in it, we use commit lint to help linting the commit messages. We also have tests in place. So we have tests for implementation and functionalities of the components. And most recently, we've also added visual regression tests to our library. So for unit tests, we are using React testing library. So we use it to check to test the different states and change of states if it's happening correctly. Also some basic user interaction, and if it's behaving correctly with when something happens to the component. For example, here this is a test for the button base, which we are checking if it's rendering the attributes correctly or if it's setting custom items correctly, for example. And like I mentioned before, we are also using now, we have visual regression tests. We use a set of official Storybook add-ons alongside a test runner container, which has a specific Puppeteer version to provide it. So we are running the tests inside a Docker image. And what we'll do is that when we trigger the visual regression tests, it will look through the Storybook stories. So it will get all of those examples of the components that we created, and it's going to create a snapshot of the components in the stories. And then later, when we have a new change or something and we run the test again, it will create new snapshots, and then it's going to overlap with the old ones and check the difference between them. And if they don't match, we get a warning. And this is super useful because, for example, here, if we are looking just at the new screenshots, we might not even had noticed that the padding of the button is actually bigger right now than the original one. If we are just working and just seeing the final button and not even comparing to the last one, we would not have noticed. But with the visual regression tool, it becomes very obvious that the padding is very different right now between the two versions. So we can now act on it. And then the last stage, we finally publish it. So for publishing our library, we are using semantic release to automate releasing. So it will take those beautiful messages created by Commitsen, and it's going to version the library based on them. So for example, if the commit message was indicating it was a feature, it is going to bump a minor change. If the commit message was saying that it was a breaking change, it's going to bump a major. If it's just a patch or a fix or something like that, it's going to patch a patch to raise a patch version. And if there were no changes at all, for example, it was just, I don't know, pipeline CI changes or something like that, then it's not even going to bother to do a new release because nothing in the library really changed. And forgot to mention that also semantic release will also create a changelog based on the commit messages that we sent. And then we have CI/CD in place. So we have this set of pipelines running on the master branch. So as soon as a merge request is approved and merged to master and the pipelines are all green, a new version of the library is published to our internal registry. And now it is available and the new version of Storybook is published. And now it is available for any developer to just npm install it and profit. Everybody is free to start using it in their products. So these are the development experience that we had. And I want to close this with some conclusions that I gather after working on Nexus. So first thing is that I can say that working in the shared design system really helped us ensuring the coherent experience, like I was saying before. And it helps with all of those other aspects that I was talking about. It's helping us to focus on real problems that we need to solve. For example, recently I was working on a proof of concept of a new data structure that we wanted to try in the listing page. And the layout the designer delivered was based in the design system. So instead of spending some time trying to replicate the UI and creating the visual components, I just got the right components from the design system, and it was done in minutes. And then I could spend my time focusing on what really mattered, which was studying this new data structure that we wanted to display in the UI. And the common language has also helped us to focus the discussions. They are very accessible to everybody. And like I said, not only for engineers and designers, but product managers in general also very easily can grasp the concepts when we are talking, when everything are just components. It's super simple for them to grasp it. And on the topic of communication, yeah, communication is very important in this case. It's super important to be aligned between tech, design, and product, because hardly you're going to start a design system having instant buy-in and creating a team for it. Usually, the motivation we will start with developers and designers when they notice that creating these guidelines and principles is going to improve the product they're delivering, and it's also going to improve their workflow. It's better when both devs and designers are interested in starting the design system, because once it starts, it's beautiful to see the results. Recently, we had a collaboration between designers from different teams between Nolex and Motors. They were both sharing the research that they were doing when they were exploring some chat components. And so they were collaborating, defining rules and sharing experiences. And these are people that are working on different hubs. So having the opportunity to work together and bring the discussions and bring them closer was really nice. And the design system helped a lot with that. But sometimes the design system might start one-sided. It's either only the designers or only the developers that are interested in starting it, especially because it will require some work beforehand. But in the end, it's not that much if you consider that you still need to develop your product either way. So you might just well be doing it in a more structured manner. This is not much different of having a design critique or code review in place. We are just scaling the discussions and the alignments. So it's not like you're creating that much extra work, because you still are going to have to work on these things anyway. So in the end, we all want to deliver good products and good user experiences. So the design system will help you with that. On the topic of having a cleaner code base, I'll bring back the topic about the base components, and it goes beyond that. So the base components come from the concept of breaking down your components, because when in doubt, you should be breaking down. So if your component is already having a lot of business logic in it, or if it's starting to become too big, it's probably because you're not abstracting it enough and you're not making it reusable. And it's starting to become very complex situation. So even a simple text field can be broken down into label and input, and then these smaller parts can then be used later to compose with other things. But be careful to not start breaking it too much, or you end up with dust, and we don't want. Then we won't be able to work on that level. And then finally, please, 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 please do define well your tokens, or the token police is going to come after you. And that's it for today. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. It was really nice. I really enjoyed it. Now we are open for questions. So if you have any questions, just unmute yourself, or you can post them down in the chat.
I can go. Can I go first?
Yes, sure.
So first of all, congratulations. It was an awesome
Hi.
presentation.
Sorry.
Hi. It was great, very lively and straight to the point, very clear. I just wanted to ask you if you have any idea of the time it took for you to develop or to create at least the first version that you could present to you to the whole company. And yeah, I just wanted to get to know a bit more about that, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so specific timelines because we didn't, let's say, just stopped everything that we are working. Like I said, you're not going to start a design system saying, oh, now we have a design system team and everybody is going to stop what they're doing and work on it. So we worked on it in parallel to the other tasks that we already working on. Um, but I have to say that no, it's not super fast. It's not like a week or so. We probably spent a couple of months building the design, the basic library initially. I'm talking more about the design system that we had in Motors because I worked on that from the start. On the one from Alex, I don't really know as well how long they took because when I started working on it, it was already a very big library there. But yeah, and we started like real simple, just getting the components that actually we already had on our code base and cleaning them up and abstracting them a little bit and moving to a separate library. At first we were even considering doing it just in a separate folder inside the own project, but then we're like, no, let's do it properly, putting the in its own place with documentation. And it's not in the presentation anymore because we are not using it on Nexus, but we used KCD scripts, which is a library from KCD that is the creator of the React testing library. So he has these really nice scripts that he uses for his open source projects that helps with boosting up running the test and publishing. So it helped us a lot with setting up this individual repo with the library, and so that sped up a lot the process. So we only really needed to take care of structuring structuring the project and moving the components there. And we had tickets for like creating the button, creating in pure HTML, creating it in React. And we are doing it as alongside, oh, so we are now working on this feature and we need a button, we need a checkbox, we need an input. So before working on that, we are going to create that in the design system. So maybe having the library itself, although almost empty, it was like 2 weeks, I think, 1 or 2 weeks working on it. Yeah, because like I said, this script helped us a lot to speed up the process. But then later, to having a lot of components, yeah, it's how long we took to people start moving. And even today, we sometimes make some adjustments because it's still being used in parts of the product.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. Yes, Anda, please.
Hi. So I have two questions, but I'm going to go with the first one. I guess it's easier. Um, you said that you're using emotion for the styling. I was
Yes.
wondering, so in our design system, we are using styled components, and I haven't found a good way um, to do the props, like to show the props for styled components. And I was wondering if you ran into the same thing, because the default Storybook block for props does not work with props that are passed to a styled component.
Oh, okay. I see. So for the emotion part, I'm not sure, but I know that. So we use emotion for the things like CSS in JS, and we are using the styled system for doing, like you said, we have props to pass some stylings in some base components. And for that, we didn't have much issues with Storybook. I believe the library was able to handle it well. what I can say is that when we worked on Ignition for the props, we used the plugin for README files that would take the README, and we are using prop types. Yes, prop types for defining the components, and we used the tag that was like props, I think, inside the README file, and it would automatically generate the props itself, the table of the props of the component. But I'm not sure if that was what you're really asking. So can you elaborate a little bit more? So you say you're using styled components.
Yes. I'm also using prop types for the components, but I do have some components in my design system that are just styled components. Like let's say a label would be a styled component of type label, and it takes some props like color or margin bottom, let's say. And these props, because I only define them for the style component and not for a React component, Storybook doesn't know how to port them in the props. So like you cannot do prop types on a styled component. So the props that you just pass into the component and that you use in the style component, they don't get picked up by Storybook.
Okay, I'm actually here on the side. I'm checking our code base real quick to see if because yeah, we are displaying right now in our Storybook the props that are coming. It is finding the props from TypeScript, and it's also finding the props that we use because of styled system. But right now, I don't quite remember if there was any special treatment for that.
It's fine. I don't want to. I don't want to hold down the conversation. Yeah. I was just wondering if you ran into this or if you know more than I do about this.
Yeah, no, in this case, no. The problems that I had with props and Storybook was related with using prop types and using composed prop types.
Yeah, I also have this problem.
Yeah, so, and that one I was not really able to solve it.
Yeah, there's an open issue for that in
Storybook. Exactly. Yeah, it would present like object or something like that. And we had a special note for this. Oh yeah, we would manually then add to the README file the specification of these composed types because I'm sorry.
No
now
problem.
I'm also interested. If I find something later, I'll let you know.
Okay, I'll let somebody else ask a question and then I'll ask another question if there's time. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Ricardo.
Hi, great presentation. So I was wondering, you mentioned briefly that at least some part of the organization of our components, it's inspired by Airbnb. So let's imagine that I'm starting a new design system today. What would be great inspirations for me? Like, who should I look into?
Oh, okay. The list is big. So yeah, the Airbnb one is a great starting point. There is this presentation that they gave at a conference a few years ago where they explained this part of they also had a similar experience to us where they started with one design system and then evolved into another one and how they structured. Another really nice talk is, and although it's not public, is the design system from Badu. So like I also mentioned in the presentation, if you look for a presentation from Cristiano Rastelli, he also explains the full process. He has 3 blog posts, very long, about the process of starting the design system at Badu, and they also have the situation of using it across different brands inside the company. Another really good blog posts are from Nathan Curtis. So Nathan Curtis is almost like a father of the design system. He has a lot of topics. He's one that talks a lot about tokens, for example, and how to help structure them and structuring the base of your design system. He has a lot of also posts about how to structure your design system, how to help organizing your team, and yes, he has a lot, many topics, many publications about it. And then design systems to get inspiration from. We also looked a lot into Carbon design system, which is from IBM. Yes, Carbon is from IBM. They also have the library actually done in for different frameworks. So they have for React, they have for Vue, they have for Angular, they have for just pure CSS. So and it's open source, so it's there for you to look at the code, and it's really nice. Another nice library that we used. It's a little bit more basic, but it's the protocol Storybook, which is the one for Mozilla. So they actually work more with pure components, but they also have some nice definitions about atoms and so on. And then lastly, I would also recommend, I think it's not Spotlight. I always confuse the name, but it's the one from Salesforce. I don't find the design system itself super pretty, but the structure is very good, and the definitions of the components. It's not Spotlight.
I think it's Lightning.
Lightning. Yes, it's something with light. Thank you. Yes, it is Lightning. It's Storybook, and it's also very well structured, and it's a nice inspiration.
Thank you, Fran.
I gave you a lot of things to research. I hope everybody took notes. And just before I get to you, because I just saw there was a message in the chat also. So Dimitro was asking, how do you organize code for design library? Is this Monorepo or a set of separate repositories? So currently we are using a Monorepo, just sorry, just because we found it easier to handle it this way. We've sorry, my voice is failing. 1 second. So we very briefly considered using something like Lerna and versioning the components individually. But since it was easier to just have a monorepo and just doing publishes and everything in a single place, we decided to have a single repo with the single versioning, and something that could be looked more in the future. Because, for example, right now we work with truncate development. So a new version, we don't have like beta versions, or like if we have a new major, we still are doing things for the previous major version. So you either fully migrate to the new one, or you are missing out on new updates. So yeah, that's what happens when we need to keep it simple in the development process. And so far it is working. Dealing with major, I can talk a little bit more about how we are handling breaking changes right now. But yeah, sometimes can be challenging. And now, yes, and sorry. Now, what was your question?
Another question that I have is another problem that I've run into with our design system. How do you manage the API consistency between components? So do you also describe that at the beginning, like along with the tokens or somewhere? What shorthands for props you should use, or if something is positioning something like above or below, is there always a prop that's going like end of question? I think I understand.
Yeah, no, I got it. We currently don't have a proper documentation on our guidelines, like with the rules for the API. But we do keep them in mind when we are doing code review, for example. And if someone is bringing a prop, for example, for displaying a text to a component or something, we might go back to it and say, oh, did you check how the other components are implementing this? Are you keeping the same structure? So although we don't have rules, we do try as a group to keep consistency, and we are working harder on it right now. Because, for example, I can say with the previous design system, as it was being done a little bit more ad hoc, so a little bit more on demand. Uh, we went a little bit more freely, so let's see what sticks. Let's try it out. And in the end, it happened what you're mentioning. So we had a component that to display the text inside, we were using a prop called display text, and then another component had label, and then another component had text, and another component was using children. So we didn't have a clear structure, and it was a clear problem that we are trying to remediate on Nexus, but that is more on keeping a closer eye on that, and helping using either common practices. For example, right now, okay, for text inside, it's better to use the children, and then we try to have a label or a text prop. We see the others, how other components are done, and try to replicate that. Yeah, but I would recommend having an API more defined and with the structure of how props usually should be done, because it will cause problems in the future if you're not paying attention to that. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Welcome. And then I saw that Daniela asked if I could share the resources in the meetup details afterwards. And yes, that's a great idea. I realized, yeah, that I gave a lot of tips on these resources. I'm going to publish it, to post it in the meetup channel later. Does Daniel? Yes, Daniel.
I have a question. When do you think it's worth creating a design system for a company or a product?
When it's worth it, I want to say always. But I know it's hard, and it's not that simple. I would say that at least trying to document the components that you're having, at least trying to give them a structure, at least trying to use Storybook. So the things that you're creating, it's very easily discoverable by the developers. Um, so yeah, at least starting with the basic things. So having the component structure, trying to have Storybook or something to showcase them. And also on the designer side, they probably have a shared library of the components that they use on Sketch and so on. So yeah, having that base will help you a lot to jump to a design system later. So the moment to jump to a design system, it, is perhaps when you start iterating over your product. So perhaps you already have a product that is starting to get established, and you're starting to create new things on it, and you want to be consistent on those things. So you don't have an input that looks like something in one place, and then you have a form that has because here I'm talking about actually about small things like buttons and inputs, but it goes beyond that. Like I was mentioning, we had these designers discussing about chat components. So for example, how the chat bubbles should be structured, where should we display information about time, how should we deal with uh, with with attachments to the messages. We also had designers discussing about posting forms, and for example, the structures, if we should have steps in the form, if we should display optional components with the tag that they are optional, optional fields, or if we should only be marking required ones. So the design system will also help with that. So when you start dealing with more complex things, having this kind of studies and having this kind of discussions helps a lot. So you might already have a design system happening behind the curtains and you don't even know about it. So yeah, probably that's the moment when you're starting discussing and improvements and creating new things, and you are discussing better experience. You should probably keep note of that so you continue doing that in the future, and that might be the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I hope I kind of answered it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Does anyone else have any questions? Just unmute yourself or post them in the chat.
I can also expand a little bit more on some things. Once I got a question, why do we use zero height if we also have Storybook? Why not just only use Storybook, for example, for documenting everything? And the answer that we are liking to use zero height, one is that, like I mentioned, it's very user-friendly, and especially because then designers don't have, because if we are going to use only Storybook, then if the designers want to add, for example, the do's and don'ts and more details about usage of components, they will need to know how to deal with markdown language. They are going to need to know how to do a commit. They are going to need to know how to create a pull request and this kind of thing. So it starts creating a lot of layers of complexity, and it's not really worth it. So in this case, for us, zero height has been an amazing tool that they can, and it's kind of Wix or Squarespace. They just go there and they just put the text box and start typing, and then they link with the examples from Zeppelin, they link with Storybook, and it's a very nice tool. And then in the end, Storybook, it's really useful for the developers to have this playground and the API check on the components. Hey, Enda. Okay, so shout out.
Hey, I have another quick question. I was wondering, so some of the components that we developed in our design system also had the same path that your components started out, like developing things ad hoc as we needed them. And that keeps happening as more and more like the products are growing and there are more products using the design system. And so what is your strategy? You mentioned the primary button, secondary button, to not have a lot of props for one component or having a lot of variants for the same component. But still, do you have other tips for or a strategy for keeping props manageable? An example would be if I have a component that has a wrapper and some children, like generate some children based on like inside, like let's say notification, and you need notifications inside the notifications container, and you need to space the children differently. You would need an extra prop to pass to the container, so it spaces the children differently. So these things can just pop up as components grow. So do you have a strategy or tips to keep these things manageable or consistent?
Yeah, what we try to keep in mind is if we are starting to add a lot of complexity to one component, so like you're saying, if we are starting to create a lot of props for it, it's probably a code smell that you're either having a component that is doing too much, so you're probably should be breaking it into two different components, or you're probably customizing this component too much for you, and it won't be that much reusable later. So probably because we also have this step, so what we have in the library should be abstract enough to be used by everybody. So if you're starting to say, oh, but here for this feature that I'm working on, I actually need this notification icon to be a little bit more centered or something like that. So when you're starting to change the behavior or you're starting to change the pattern of the design system, so that's probably something that one, you shouldn't be doing. Or if it is something that it's actually a recurring case or is something that will benefit and allow more usage, then okay, then maybe we can discuss how to implement that. And then in the case of the component getting too complex, for example, recently we were discussing, and it all starts in the discussion in that slide that I posted before about the communication part. So everything starts with that. So the person starts, for example, recently we got a suggestion about a tooltip that they wanted to have steps on it for onboarding. So like having arrows for going to the next one and steps for changing the tooltip between in different places of the screen. And you're like, okay, yeah, so we see this component, it makes sense to have this component to help dealing with onboarding, so we can have the many steps and etc. etc. But then we're like, okay, but remember, it was still a tooltip. What is the purpose of a tooltip? It is to pop up and show some information, and that's it. So if we are now adding this extra functionality of the tooltip to also be doing doing steps of onboarding, we are starting to increase the responsibility of it. So perhaps we should step back and see, okay, so here we are actually dealing with two different things. We have the tooltip that appears on hover or on click when you need, and you need a different content inside it that is the onboarding, that is a stepper. So then we discuss, okay, so we need to break it down, and perhaps we even are needing a popover, something that is more fixed to the screen. And so let's define that and focus only on this small component, and then we can compose that with the tooltip inside. So this will help you with keeping the props a little bit smaller, because yeah, if you're starting to add too much customization, then it's a balance if you want your design system to be super flexible or more constrained. But usually, on what I think, if you're starting to add too much props, your component probably is starting to do too much, and you probably would benefit from breaking it down and having the responsibilities more defined for each one. I hope that helped. Awesome.
May I proceed with the Andalusia question here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I understand that there are certain kind of behaviors that are not on scope, or at least are not that in the scope of a design system. That is the exponential growing with the time, or an uncontrolled growing of a component or a group of components. But how have you dealt in the past with some scenario where, for instance, there are a couple, not a couple, just a couple, but multiple teams consuming the same design system, proceeding at different speeds and with different necessities not at the same time. For example, they will eventually need a certain feature on a component, but it's just not doable to update that component to be widely available for all the teams. Have you worked with on-spot changes? So each team that is consuming that component starts to do not an abstraction, but an extension of that component with the functionality they want, or they simply start to mutate the component in a way that becomes unreadable on a given period of time.
Yeah, so inside the library itself, we keep a closer look. So like you mentioned, now having the component mutating a lot and doing a lot of things, on that we try to keep a closer eye on it, and that won't happen unless we really agreed on it. But outside the library, yes, it happens sometimes that people take the shortcut and oh, I actually needed this tooltip to look in a different color, or I need something to look differently, and we'll just overwrite. When we notice that, then we reach out to the people that are doing these changes and asking, oh, why did you need this variation? Is this something that perhaps we could be supporting? And then, yeah, we ask the people to come to the design system and do the changes that they need and deliver. Sometimes if the rush is too much to deliver something and it's not possible, then they do the change, and then we ask, oh, but please later come back and update that in the design system, and then update that in the library. So it happens, and it's more based on communication, and we're going after and trying to sync and align. There is no, oh, bad, you now delete this and redo it. We are not on that level.
Yeah, because if we want it or not, that's something that tends to kill this kind of initiatives of having an internal design system that can end up as another project that's simply a mess and not and it's not serving its initial purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Thank you.
Dimitro, I see you popping up your screen. Yeah, sorry, you had a question too.
Yeah, I have my question is regarding browser compatibility. Like, what kind of browser support do you provide? And what's even more interesting, like, how do you handle browser compatibility conflicts? Let's say when consumer wants something like support of IE6, let's say.
So yeah, so right now in the company we are not supporting that old of an IE, so that is fine. Yeah, what we try to keep in mind is like resetting the styles. So for example, if you're using the component on Firefox, it doesn't have suddenly a gray background on something. That is definitely something that we could actually do a little bit better. Right now, I think we tend to test more the components on Chrome. And when building the library, we have like the configuration, I believe, the browsers that we support, like X minus versions of Chrome, X minus versions of Mozilla, like this basic stuff. And currently, I know that on Motors we have graceful degradation for IE11. I'm not sure about OLX, how they're doing. So I know that our components at least need to work on Edge and up. And the IE11 is more of a graceful degradation thing than full-on support. Yeah.
Thanks. And one more extra question. What kind of tool chain are you using to build the actual project? Is it React scripts or something else?
To build the project,
To bundle.
To bundle, we are using Rollup. Yes, we are using Rollup to bundle the library.
And for development, React scripts probably, or I mean, in development mode to show it in browser.
We are using Storybook. So we run Storybook and create the stories and start seeing the components in the stories. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Awesome. I don't know if we have more questions.
No, do we maybe one last question? Let's see if somebody has. If not, we're gonna end this, and want to thank you for your time. So anyone has any other questions? No? So
I think Franciele is free to take her coffee right now.
I'm fine. Not that hungry
thank you
today.
very much. Franciele, any last words that you want to tell us? I really enjoyed the meetup and the presentation, and also the informations that you told us afterwards. And thank you for taking time for the Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, just want to say thank you very much for having me. It was really fun doing this presentation, and yeah, hope to also be in more meetups and try to participate in other meetups here of the JSHeroes.
Yeah, we're open for presentations. So if you know someone or any of you want to present, just drop us a line through the JSHeroes Facebook page, through the meetup, and they're gonna end up to these requests. They're gonna end up to me. I'm Daniel, and yep, that's it. Thank you very much, and have a good day and enjoy your coffee.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everybody.